Lenovo's ThinkPad lineup has always been focused on balancing tradition with modernity. It carries the legacy of IBM's iconic laptop brand, but the company also has to make sure it keeps up with the competition. That's truer than ever with the new X1 Carbon, Lenovo's flagship ultraportable, which packs in Intel's latest chips and a few nifty upgrades. It doesn't have a folding screen, and it can't be turned into a slate, like with the X1 Yoga and tablet. It's simply a laptop. But it's one that's polished enough to compete with the likes of Dell's XPS 13 and Apple's MacBook Air. Now in its 6th generation, the X1 Carbon retains everything that's made the line an ideal productivity machine over the past few years. It starts out at just 2.5 pounds, and it measures 16 millimeters thick. It's noticeably lighter than the 2.7 pound XPS 13, so much so that it's hard to notice it's actually a bit thicker. The X1 Carbon's sturdy carbon fiber case makes a return, as does the soft touch coating that makes it feel surprisingly luxurious, especially on your wrists. Aside from some branding tweaks, nothing has changed design-wise. You'll be able to tell it's a ThinkPad from across the room. For some users though, that's more of a feature than a compromise. Lenovo also brought back the touchscreen feature in the Carbon's 14-inch display, which was missing in the last generation. It's a nice thing to have, especially when browsing around the web. But the laptop's matte display makes the touch experience a bit rough compared to mobile glass screens. Our review unit came with a standard 1080p display, but you can also upgrade to a higher resolution 1440p model that packs in Dolby Vision HDR. Despite the lower resolution, the screen looks great when browsing the web and watching movies. But if you plan to do a lot of video watching, or you just want the latest tech, it's worth springing for the HDR option, which will deliver deeper blacks and brighter highlights. If you're privacy conscious, you'll definitely appreciate the physical shutter that can block the webcam. It's a better option than tape, but it would have been nice if it were easier to switch on and off. It requires a decent amount of force to be moved, and you'll likely lose a bit of your fingernails in the process. Unfortunately, there's no Windows Hello support in the webcam unless you upgrade to the higher resolution monitor. It's unclear why that limitation is in place, but it might be due to the size of the 1080p panel. At least the fingerprint reader is more secure than before. The sensor can authenticate your identity entirely on its own, without sharing any data with the computer. As for connectivity, the Carbon X1 features 2 Thunderbolt 3 compatible USB-C ports, which can also charge the laptop, as well as 2 USB Type-A connections and an HDMI port. There are also microSIM and microSD card slots tucked away in the back. The Carbon X1 isn't exactly a surprising machine. It's a rock-solid, ultralight business laptop. It sports the same killer keyboard on all of Lenovo's professional machines, with a luxurious 1.8mm of travel. Typing on it felt better than many desktop keyboards I've used, and it certainly blows away Apple's disastrous flat MacBook options. The touchpad is smooth and accurate, and I also give Lenovo credit for sticking with the iconic red ThinkPad nub. It takes a bit of getting used to, but it's a great way to maneuver through windows in cramped environments. The Carbon X1 is powerful enough to handle most productivity tasks thanks to Intel's 8th gen processors. Since there's no dedicated graphics though, it's not a great option for playing games or 3D rendering, but that won't matter to most business users. For the most part, what struck me about the Carbon X1 was just how much it felt like those old ThinkPads I used to adore in the Windows XP era. Of course, it's a lot lighter and thinner, but it felt just as reliable and empowering. It booted up quickly, launched everything I needed without skipping a beat, and most importantly, it never left me wanting for more power. In our battery test, which involves looping in HD video, the laptop lasted for 15.5 hours. That's among the best we've seen in ultraportables. While using it a bit more realistically throughout the day, it typically lasted for 8 hours. The ThinkPad X1 Carbon starts at $1,519 with a Core i5 8th generation processor, 8GB of RAM, and a 256GB M.2 SSD. That's a decent start, but I'd spend the extra $180 to add the HDR 1440p screen. Since it's a business class machine, it's unsurprisingly more expensive than typical ultraportables. The XPS 13 starts at $999, and you can even get a MacBook Pro cheaper than the Carbon X1. Basically, you're not buying a ThinkPad if you're trying to save money. While the ThinkPad Carbon X1 isn't a huge evolution over last year's model, Lenovo packed in enough upgrades to keep the line in step with modern ultraportables. Unfortunately, you'll have to go beyond the entry-level model to see the best new features, like the HDR display. Perhaps next year we'll see a major design leap for the Carbon line, but knowing the rabid ThinkPad fans out there, Lenovo will have to tread carefully. Bold new ideas are what the X1 Yoga and tablet models are for, after all. The Carbon, meanwhile, remains the most refined business laptop around.